All right.
Okay, looks like the transcription has started.
What episode are we on now?
We're on 10. Double
Wow,
digits.
10. So I've been thinking recently about clean code. I'll get to the definition later, but something we were big on back in the day. And I was kind of thinking about a statement that my old colleague had, and he said, you need to know exactly what every line of code does. And I was thinking with that in terms of we go out, we go into all the AIs, we grab a function, we slap it in our code, and on we go. But the reality in that, doing that, and I know I've done it a lot recently, and I was doing a lot of really complex SQL this last week.
Right.
And quite honestly, I cannot tell you what that SQL does, other than I know it works.
Right. It gives you what you expected. Yeah.
And, I'm like, that's wrong. Just from a pure dev engineering point, that is wrong.
Sure.
I shouldn't be putting things in my code base that I don't know what they do.
Right. Yeah. I heard somebody say something like every single AI script needs to go through almost a pull request type review.
Yes.
Yes, I agree. Yep.
And then yesterday you checked in mangled, or what I consider mangled HTML.
Yes.
And then that got me thinking back onto the whole thing of, code standards and naming conventions. And like, if we get code from AI, how can we be certain that unless we specify that its naming convention is the same as what we're using, and you can see
things are going, I think, in the sense of it wouldn't take much effort, even with our existing code base, or if a company has just a couple code bases, to do what they call a fine tuning, where you take each module, let's say they're React components, right? And then you just create a little prompt, create me a React component that does X, Y, and Z. If you have, let's say a couple hundred to 1,000 examples of that, if you run your model, it's going to conform to those standards, right? So it's like your code has a very structured way of approaching it. So if you come up with a task, I was thinking you could even use the stories in GitHub. I mean, in Git, where you take the code that was before the story and the code that was after the story, and put the definition of the story in between. And then I think that's a lot of engineering to get there, but I think that's what it would take to get it where the AI is writing to your standards, right?
Yeah, or you've got to say, like, I know you can do with ChatGPT and that you can say remember, and you could probably go in there. I've said remember, I always want TypeScript, but I probably could go and say, okay, I want all my local variables to start with an underscore. I want everything to do this. I want that. I want that. But my biggest concern is, you grab code from one AI, I grab it from another KI. I'm getting code from Codinium. I'm getting code from 4 or 5 places.
It's a very valid point. Yeah.
And, there's no consistency. I notice that. Sorry, that's my cat.
Sure.
I generally, if I'm declaring standalone functions, I use the const. Const, function names equals parameters, lambda, bang. It always does function, uses the old function daddy. So I kind of know that those are all the AI in my code base because I don't code that way.
And you're right. I mean, you're so right. I mean, you probably would have to specify the certain syntax, because that const and the lambdas, all of that is sort of a syntactic layer that you would have to tell it, I want to use that, right?
Yeah, and I think, so let's get into some things that do make what they call clean code.
Yes.
So one of the first things is consistent code. And I think that's one of the, because, you can tell my code, you just have to look at it and you go, okay, Anton wrote this, or And, we could tell when we had a bigger team or 4 or 5 developers, although it was all confirmed to a coding standard, we could tell whose was whose just by
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
way you go about it. You shouldn't really, but you
Mhm.
can. But it's still, code that is well organized, systematic, regular. I don't, this day spacing and all that's irrelevant because you just, that was a big thing back in the day before the IDEs did your code formatting. Now you just format the darn thing and
As
don't
long as
care
you have the
about.
same formatter, like you said.
Yes, as long as they have a consistent formatter across everybody in the team. And the
That's right.
problem with it is not really whether one's right or wrong. It's that
Yeah.
if somebody formats it, the blast pull request becomes
Mhm.
90% noise because of the change in formatting rather than just the actual changes. And then you don't know
That's right.
from somebody reviewing it what's just a format change and what is a actual code change.
That's
So
a
it
good point. Yep.
creates a lot of noise in the pull requests, and that's
Yep.
the problem.
Yeah. 100%. You're absolutely right.
Um, the second one is conventional. The code performs tasks with expected instructions. It's like, it should do exactly what it says. It shouldn't do like something extra because somebody figured, oh yeah, just stick it in here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Identifiable, names, structures, all of that. I think to me, but the formatting, the convention, that's big things.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Foundational, but huge. If it's not there, it just adds so much
and
noise, as you said.
and naming conventions. I like in React, all my use states, all my users are always put an underscore, so I know what's kind of at component level.
Mhm.
And then within a function, I don't. I just use, and then I know that's local and the other is a state variable. And that way I never get too confused
Makes
because,
sense. Yeah.
and when I'm on the back end, the underscore goes to class level variables and still functions don't have an underscore. So anything I declare for a class is,
Right.
and then if I want to make that public, then I'll do a get method that doesn't have the underscore.
Right.
So,
Okay. So those are always private, the underscores.
yeah. So all my underscores are private, global to the class or global to the component. And that's basically how I work. And that works for me. Okay. So, and I think this is another big one, intentional code. Clear code that is self-explanatory, transparency, communicates in its function. You name that function, it does what it says. And if you go look at it, it's really self-explanatory.
Right.
You
Not trying to
shouldn't
be overly fancy just for the sake of it. I know what you mean.
Yeah. And if it is overly fancy, then you need to break it up into multiple simple functions to achieve that complexity.
Yeah, I remember one time I was on a project where we were writing C#, and it was, I wasn't super proficient in C# at the time, but the guy who was leading the project, who was training us all, was, master guru. He had all these tools in his IDE, and he was writing these, super lambda, search functions, and I just to understand his code, I had to go and learn more about C#. And it wasn't necessary. If I could see it if he was doing things where that was absolutely essential, but it ended up just being frustrating. It's like, oh, he's actually just doing it to save 7 characters in a loop.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I don't know if it's in this, one of the things I was reading about is we discovered early on, and you'll see AI loves to do this, is to chain up things. It'll chain 3 or 4, if it can, things all in a single line. And although they might be efficient, debugging that's an absolute nightmare.
Oh, I see. Like if it's an array and they'll put like a filter and then a reduce and then
a map and then a
yes.
reduce, and
Mm-hmm.
you have no way of getting in between and
Right.
knowing what's going on. And so what we
Mm-hmm.
learned a long time ago is like, I purposefully break those things up
Hmm. Yes,
just
because like
so
yeah.
I can put a breakpoint down and say, okay, yep, it's coming in. The filter's working. Okay, yep, the map is working. Yep, okay, the reducer's working. And I
Right.
can see the state in between. But if it's all in one big thing, forget it, buddy. Just forget it. Not happening.
Yes. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Um, yeah, I've
And
seen that. Yeah, and I've also felt the temptation of my own code. That's sort of like what some of the times when I say fancy, it's like in my own code, I can easily just say, oh, I can write this simple, 3 chains, but then you're right. I have to think back. What if something goes wrong here? Yep.
yeah, I mean, if it's something simple, yeah, go, if you
Yeah, yeah.
filter and you're getting a string out and you want the string to have, added quotes, like, yeah, okay, go for it. But
Right,
if
right.
it's a bit more complicated than that, yeah, break it up, boy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Logical, yes. Uh, I,
Mm-hmm.
that's the problem with multiple if statements. Our biggest nightmare.
Mm.
When I joined the previous company, and the first day I remember I walked in, you gave me some code. I looked at it and it had like 15 if statements, and I just knew it was trash. At that point, I just
Yeah.
knew that code was trash and was never ever going to work.
Yeah, and that had some, not just those if statements, but they were like overloaded if statements where like one
Yeah,
half was an and, one half was an or with multiple cases. It's like it's way beyond Boolean logic at that point.
yeah. No, I mean, there's just like that. Your code, 3 or 4. That's it. Anything more than that, that code needs to be refactored, and that
Mhm.
is just it.
Yeah.
There are cases, but they're few and far between, and there are often better ways of achieving that end goal, breaking it up into small functionality, breaking it up into different classes.
Hmm.
But that code just should never, ever exist. Um, the code construction are comprehensive and adequate and thorough. Code is functional and achieves its implied goals. Yeah,
Yep.
And efficiency. It
Mm.
should be absolutely efficient. It's like, I mean, I was running into errors, my own code where I thought I was preloading stuff and it was just inefficient. I was like, okay, go there. And generally, things that are inefficient are things that are in loops that are doing something multiple times that don't need to be done multiple times because they
Yep.
haven't thought through the cost of that process.
Yep. I had a just thing this week on a really simple thing where it when the React component was being torn down, it wasn't actually taking the event listeners off. But that component was a component that was continually being redrawn. If you had like 30 items you paged through, that meant, each time you were getting, and yeah, and then, but there's a thing, if I only tested it with 1 or 2 clicks, I wouldn't have picked it up, right? I had to click through at least 6 times before the headroom had, shown that, oh, wait, I've got a memory leak here.
Yeah, and React components have a really, crappy way of tearing down.
Yes.
They're actually functional components. They could have been done a much better job on that. And I
I
find
agree.
it really unreliable, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, me too.
So, but I mean, I hit this yesterday was it yesterday or the day before with my Postgres. I was creating multiple instances and I kept running out of Postgres clients.
Mm.
Because I wasn't tearing them down properly. I wasn't doing all of that properly. So I had to go through and make sure all of that happened. And I think that's one of the things that in like older languages like Delphi, you knew very quickly because that whole thing would come crashing down on you. So everything was create, try, finally destroy, create, destroy. You were managing your own memory.
Right.
And when we in the modern languages with garbage collectors, we get lazy. So the
That's right.
times like with a database connection where you should be open, close, especially when it's in a web app where the calls coming in, you're opening, you close, you're done, you're closing. Man,
Right.
if you don't get those things right, you can run out of what I did. And eventually I did, do a singleton controller, make sure and go through all the code, make sure there were try finalies absolutely everywhere, which there should be because but we get lazy,
Yeah, that principle, it's like, yeah, the garbage collector is there, but there are instances where it does not get collected because maybe the code is written in a way that's, not clear enough for the garbage collector to know this is not needed again. Yeah.
But it's also, a garbage collector will drop the class, but that doesn't mean that the connection to the database is closed.
Right. No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's all kinds of after effects. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so just being clean about that can make a huge difference to your performance. But it comes down to, is that block of code kind of isolated in its own, doing what it should be doing? And I think that's really important. And again, you can get stuff off AI or, in the old days, we used to copy paste out of, people's blogs and that, and not necessarily that code won't be in the context of the bigger system. Right. And I think we used to, when we got code off examples of blogs and off other sites, we would take that, look at it, but type it out ourselves, retype it, reformat it into our code. Right. Whereas I've noticed with the AI, we have a tendency to copy, paste, go.
If it works. Yeah. Yep.
And not necessarily, look at the finer details because there's a high expectation that the AI is going to work. Whereas some guys blog where have zero expectation that it's going to work.
Exactly.
It'll work in his example, but it doesn't mean it'll work in ours. But somehow we can give the AI more. So yeah, that to me is a big one. Then my favorite is adaptability.
Yeah.
I love this, being able to reuse code. And code has a single, narrow, specific scope. Man.
But that also, it sort of builds a house of cards on top of those simple modules. So I don't know if I was just reading today about, I don't know if you've heard of in 2016, this developer got mad at NPM because they gave his name to a corporation that owned the trademark. And so in rebellion, he just deleted all of his NPM packages. And one of them was called pad left. And it was literally 12 lines of code that it was one function. You passed in a string and a number of how much you wanted and padded it left, right? But literally the Webpack build, the Babel build packages, all these core JavaScript packages had used this guy's pad left, and they all broke. Literally a 12-line thing that any other developer might, have said like, oh, well, let me just write a little 12, let me write a little function to pad. So it does mean that as we think modular, we have to also, be more cognizant of the interdependencies.
Yeah.
And maybe it's better to have your own interdependencies you can control rather than these other ones, right? You don't want to fill up your code base with libraries that some mad developer could just make obsolete on you.
Oh, well, I have my own pad left.
Yes, exactly.
But yes, and I mean, the problem I'm hitting now is that I've tried to become, in a sense, I mean, this is the struggle now with my reporting, is like, I designed this adaptable UX. It's like, it's not really adaptable to what were the original requirements. And it's like, now the requirements are changing. I'm like, oh man, I hate to have like, specifics for every report, but it's like, how much can what is, I just got the feeling that if I try and make this too adaptable, it's just going to be an absolute nightmare. It's like when I'm working in the kitchen and the workshop, I hate tools that do 5 things, because they don't do, as opposed to 5 tools that do one thing. And I think 5 tools that do one thing do that one thing better than one tool that does 5 things, except my Leatherman. My Leatherman does everything perfectly.
Yeah, well, because that is really the one thing, but in finer detail, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think that is true in software. It's like sometimes it's better just to say, you know what, I know this code is pretty close to that code in a duplicate, but it's the trying to maintain the flexibility of one line of code means that line of code is incredibly complicated.
Yep. That's
and
right.
And it might just be worth your sanity to break it apart. It's like, just break it up. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to break it up and just say, listen, I mean, I broke it up to a point, but I'm going to break it even further and just say, you know what, I know this is duplicating, but at some point I've got to accept the fact that the amount of crossover between these reports is not worth the effort to try and create something. So yes.
Yep, I'm with you. So what I'm hearing is adaptability is always the focusing goal, but sometimes, just the real world scenario, it can't be adaptable to all situations. But you can still, like, if I understand you, you're breaking it down to where now there's only a small piece that you can't be adaptable.
Well, what I have done is, like, I've got report builders. So,
yes,
I've got a year-on-year report builder, and I'm going to have a month-to-month report builder. It's like, how much commonality can I have, like, in the base class of those report builders?
Yes.
But it's adaptable enough that I can come and create another one, and boom, I can get going. The problem is the blasted grid and drawing those things, but that's we have to figure out. I might I might have to, scale a bit. But yes, but if it says that report builder is just building for the 1 year-on-year report, and then I'll have another report builder that's just building for the month-on-month. That if I need to make changes, I know I go to month-on-month and make a change. There's less risk, and that's the problem with the House of Cards. Is like my classic story. My boss at a previous company, fairly new, big corporate, junior developer, goes along writing something, sees a function, uses it, it doesn't do what it says. So he goes into the function and fixes it.
Oh no.
It's a match he broke. Because every other developer knew it was broken, but had based their code on the fact that it was broken.
Right.
Because they didn't want to take the risk of changing it in case it affected other things. So
there's a situation like that on Cloudflare. They've got a bug where one of the ranges that you set, a parameter, is reversed to the documentation. So everybody just is sort of, like, they haven't fixed it. So everybody is just building their apps against this reverse. One day when they go fix it, everybody's app is actually going to be reverse parameterized.
Or they're just going to have to fix the documentation and just be done with it. And
I think that's what they're going to have to do. Absolutely, yeah.
There's no way you can change it. It's absolutely.
Yeah.
It says here, code procedures and data are unique and distinctive without undue duplication. And I think that's the goal. It's like, how much of these 5 reports that I have to build, how much of that is duplicated code? What of that can I put in a base class? How much of it is unique? And there's a bit of an art, and sometimes there's a bit of a fiddle to go, okay, I've written that 3 times. Okay, let me put that in the base class.
Right.
Okay, let me override that. And I think, there's a bit of fiddling in getting that balance right. But that's kind of where you have to be.
Yeah, and that's another, you pointed at AI at the beginning, and that's one of the reasons I think it can't do that very well, is because of the limitations in context. It's as a human, you're aware of this much larger scope, and you can go, oh, okay, these 2 pieces relate. But we can't get enough of that context into an AI at the moment, so it stays sort of blind to a whole
Yeah.
swash of things that it could integrate.
I mean, I used it to build the SQL statements. Then I took them and I put them in my code and I broke them up and I put in variables and I put in changes and to get what I wanted out of it.
Yeah.
To make it that adaptable. So really it gave me the starting point of what I wanted.
Right.
And then I went from there on. And that's fine.
Yeah. Using it like sort of as a prototyping tool to say, okay, let me get the basics. And especially like you said, if you're working with things for the first time, that maybe is all you need to get going. Okay, now I see how it works. Now I can,
I would never have built that by hand. Well, not without a month's worth of
time.
Responsible. Code respects licensing, copyright. I think that's important. We don't go use packages or things that we should need to pay for. Code abstains from revealing hard-coded private information. Yep. That's the problem with putting a whole lot of stuff in the client side of a app. It's like, at some point you're going to and just language. But there are also other things. I came across another site, readability, changeability, extensibility, maintainability. These are somebody else's take on it.
I see the overlap in some of those things. It reminded me of a funny thing I saw this week where a guy said he just had to learn COBOL because he inherited a code base that hadn't been changed since 1992 from his mother.
Nice.
And they said, I don't think that's what they meant in inheritance and object-oriented programming.
But, the worst is when you come back to change code. I remember this happening and you go like, who was the idiot who wrote this? And you go check the change logs. Oh, it was me.
Yes.
What I've got a whole thinking.
I've got tons of that. Yeah.
And I think so leaving code in a state that you want to find it when you come back in 6 months is really, really important.
Yeah.
And, always leave the code better than when you found it. I think that's really important to me. It's like, can I come back in 6 months when I'm in a hurry and it's a bug and understand immediately what this code does without having to spend an entire day build context? Right. Yes or no? And then can I fix what I need to, is it easy to debug or do I have to spend a lot of time changing code just so that I can debug it? Or, what is in place? Hence login frameworks and all of that are in place and, so we can get in there and know what's going on. Yep. And I think that's really important. And if there's a feature, can I come without disrupting too much, go in and make that change and add that functionality without screwing everything up? Right. Yeah. Can I change it? Can I extend it? Can I maintain it? And as I say, AI doesn't have a view into all of that with your code. And I don't know if, you've built bigger things with AI. I've not built a whole app. So when you build a whole app, is it doing those things or isn't it? Depending, I suppose, on the AI.
It depends. It does depend. And, what I'm noticing is that it's getting better, right? The context issue has been an issue. Like I found that to get a whole app in the old way that I would do it required me to have like almost these mini technical requirements for every time I build a new component. And it never built a whole app at once. It just built a series of components that I kept specifying for it. And then I would plug them into the app. But the newer one, like this Bolt one that I've been trying out, it seems to be working on that level too, because I'll ask it to do something and it'll actually give feedback on, if I give it an example, like here's a JavaScript function and I want to extend it, it will engage on sort of a clean code level of why are you repeating this, and ask questions before it implements it.
Okay, I've not had that, yeah.
But I'm just evaluating it now. They gave some turkey tokens, free turkey tokens. So I'm trying those out. But I think that's the limitation. It's like right now, those are still in the domain of human knowledge because we have a high level context of our whole code base. So we can see those things where as that context grows, right now, I think that context is still quite expensive, to maintain on a compute level.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see.
I mean, that's where the inline things like Codinium and
yes.
that they have a better understanding of what's going, but still they don't have, like, as you code, you're building this architectural model in your head. You're going, okay, these and interacting with this, and it's calling that, and it's okay, it's doing this, and this is going to be a subclass. And when I get to this feature and at the end in 3 sprints time, I'm leaving space here for that to go in, and it's going to hook in here. There's no way that the AI understands that you're going to come and purposefully extend off that class.
Right.
And so we've got to make sure that when we bring that code in, we understand what it's doing, how it fits in, doesn't match what we want. And I think that's better than saying don't use AI, because we're going to use it anyway. So
yeah,
just
what I've been experimenting with too is I built a couple weekends ago, I built a little editor and a web-based thing that when you commit the code, it actually does give you sort of a review or a feedback on it. So that that I do think those sorts of tools are going to come in the pipeline, because as you mentioned, right now we're sort of giving it instructions and we're taking its first response and starting to work with it. But I think there might be a reasoning debugging level added into it where it takes that response, checks it, even in the Bolt one, it actually runs the changes and makes sure it builds. That kind of thing, I think, is getting in the smart direction.
Yeah. I wonder when Bolt's going to come in with a VS Code plugin.
Yeah, well, it looks like for Windows they have a desktop app, so I'm sure it'll be coming soon.
Okay, but yeah, it's interesting. I was reading the whole debate about the use of AI at school, and there's one teacher was saying she realized that she went and took it was write an essay about bloody bloody bloody, and she went and she took that question, she dropped it into ChatGPT, and she realized that no matter if you tweak it a bit, it always gives the same story back.
Right.
And it gives a story about, I'm Rachel and bloody, 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 bloody. So she said she had the question, and then in the small print, she said, I do not want a story about Rachel. And her trip to the beach. And everybody who just dropped it into the AI came back with that story. She basically gave them 0. And she said, no, I didn't care whether you used AI or not. I just didn't want a story about Rachel.
Yes, that's clever. That's very
clever. And if somebody had seen that and said, okay, but don't give me a story about Rachel, she said that would have been okay.
Because they had to think through the engineering of it, right?
Yeah, but then other teachers were saying that what they're now doing in classes is they're saying that's fine, you can use the AI, but I want the chat history.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes. Oh, wow. Okay, I like that.
And saying, that's so brilliant. I want to know how you got to that endpoint. What was your thinking? Did you just take the first thing that the AI gave you, or did you work with it? Did you ask for different things? How did you just use it for the grammar, to summarize,
That's brilliant. Yes.
You got to use it. So tell me how you're using it.
Yeah. It's sort of like, in long math where you show the work, but you're using calculators in between to get the different, you're not adding 7 digits, but you're actually showing the logic. I like that. That's really, really clever.
Because it's like, look, the kids are going to use it. Okay, so we got it. And it's like, we are going to use AI to code because it's hell faster. It gets us better results. It gets us where we want to be faster. We learn. It does things that we would sometimes not think of, especially in environments that we don't know.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of positives, but it's also, we've got to take the next step and say, okay, take that, bring it into our code, bring it up to our standard, rename things, get it get it to a good level.
That's right. How are I like what you're saying. It's like how are we implementing this in the cleanest way?
Yeah.
Yes, and I do think that what I've heard in this is that some of this we might be able to change in our prompting and get closer, but we're never going to remove the reality that we have to integrate this code in a responsible, I think is the word you said, way. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, maybe at some point when the AI is clever enough and it wrote the entire app, it can solve all of these things. But that's a long way away,
That's right. Yeah. Well,
And
interesting times. Yeah.
It is. It's really interesting. I mean, who would have thought back in the day when, the editors were nothing more than a text box and you had to figure everything out from scratch.
Yeah, I'm starting a new book that maybe we can chat about on one of these future episodes called The Religion of Technology. And it's interesting because it's about how a lot of the technology in the last 100 years came from very religious origins, like, really religious guys, scientists and technologists who weren't off, trying to invent another god, but, just really trying to do good through technology. So it's very interesting where it's all come to.
Yeah, it's funny. I always think about how the two American religious sects, the Shakers and the not the Mennonites, the
Amish.
The Amish.
Yes.
How the Shakers didn't do marriage, but did technology, and the Amish did lots of kids, but no technology. Guess what? Which one survived? I mean, it's obvious. But it's
like a lot of kids.
Yeah, but it's like, the Shakers were like good on. They actually invented the saw blade, the circular saw.
Okay.
They invented lots of tools things that we take for granted. They were incredibly forward thinking that way. It's just, But yeah, it's interesting.
Well, yeah, technology. Thanks again for this chat on this one on AI and how to work with it in a way that keeps our standards up.
Yeah,
I appreciate
that's
this
important.
Chat.
All right, see you.
Cheers. Have a good one.